it became clear to me pretty early on the sacrifice these men made to do this work. What they gave up and how they devoted themselves to nurturing our education, our spiritual formation. It was cool. Most of them had a great affection for sports, which is the reason many of us are here. But they, so there were many. Father Phil Kellett, of course, was part of my introduction. I had him for a freshman Latin class, and a colorful man, just a larger-than-life figure and inspiration, and he gave his whole heart and soul to the school.
In addition to everyone that's been mentioned so far, I remember Father Pieper, who was a Latin teacher, and Father Lubke, who was a math teacher. Both of them were passionate teachers. Both of them, I'll call it unique, somewhat quirky personalities, but taught with a passion.
And I really don't think you can forget Mr. Keefe, who was the vice principal, and which many of us spent a lot of time with him, including Tim there on that end.
Barely knew the man.
But he had a pretty good influence because some of the French words all started with a kind of a ooh, and people would mess it up and do different versions.
Another scholastic I remember was Denny Dugan. And what I remember most about him was teaching you how to take the other side of an argument. That still stands out to me, that he would ask you what you felt about something. He'd say, well, what if you felt the other way? Tell me, argue that side of the story. I've never forgotten that.
When I think back, there's one name that probably not many people had him as a teacher, was Father Kane. He probably taught me more about writing, along with a nun I had in grade school. I'm not an accomplished author like Joe, but he taught me basics that I've never forgotten.
Well, we can't forget Mr. Conway then.
Now, him I knew.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Why was that? I spent more time with, I will go out on a limb and say I spent more time with Mr. Conway than all the gentlemen in this room.
And Mr. Conway, what was his position?
Well, he was the disciplinarian, so when you were jugged, you were, and he, that's who you would see, and we would talk about the reproductive systems of monkeys like nobody's business.
You were judged before? Or?
I was jugged always.
Well, that's because he was heading up to all the student pep rallies and
That's
stuff
right.
like that.
Right.
You didn't go overtime, man.
It's very unfair.
You had to pay rent in his office, I think.
I should have.
Then the first teacher that I had contact with at St. Louis U High as an incoming freshman was Dominic Colacci, who was the freshman football coach. And we had over 100 kids try out for that football team freshman year. He had one assistant, Dennis Dugan, and he was integral in teaching us the fundamentals of sportsmanship, obviously the game of football, and a lot about life. Dominic was a terrific guy.
Well, now that you mentioned him, I can't believe nobody mentioned Father Hagen. I think because we didn't have, or at least I never had him for any class, but he made I think a tremendous, impression on all of us. And coming to reunions over the years, it was always amazing. He knew everybody's name 3 days after class started, and he knew it 40 years later. I was going down the hall, he was behind me, he recognized me from my walk, which was a little frightening, but how he could keep all that straight was something.
There's so many. One I have to point out is Joe Schulte. He was such a brilliant man, such a good man. I had him for chemistry, which was one of the most difficult classes I had in my 4 years here. And they had him teaching in a room above the gym, far away from everybody. I'm convinced it was because he was so loud and animated, because he disrupted everybody. And this man who knew chemistry backwards in calculus. I've done a mental block. It was calculus, which was the most difficult class I took. And he also directed plays, so this man of talent from both sides of the brain, and such a good person. But I watched in awe one day, he was working the chalkboard and doing some calculus equation, and the chalk broke in two and landed and fell down and landed in his shoe without stopping his lecture, he sat on the ground, took his shoe off, took the chalk out, stood back up, and continued writing. I don't know what he was talking about, but I was just in awe of that performance. And what a great talent! Just to be in the embrace of men like this. You knew that you were at a place where this was really going to challenge you, and so that he's one that I have to point out.
I remember accompanying a nurse, and Kevin and I would help to turn people over so she could put ultraviolet light on bed sores. I'd never seen a bed sore. I didn't know what they were, what caused them. I learned a lot. That was a very eye-opening couple-week experience.
Was that St. Rose?
It was St. Rose near North St. Louis.
Rose of
We were
Lima.
essentially, Rose of Lima. We were essentially teachers' aides.
Yeah.
We would get small groups of kids and reading and math and stuff like that too.
Grade school.
And
Yeah, it was eye-opening
it
too.
was eye-opening. It was very much so. Very rewarding. And I know from listening to Joe and Wayne, who were instrumental in getting this project going, that there was a lot of discussion among the faculty as to whether this was a good or not so good idea. But obviously it was a great idea considering where it is today and how it's continued on. Right. Yeah.
Spanish Honduras, and I mean, that was an incredible experience. And the thing that we helped build houses and paint them. I mean, and these were little 2-room houses, and two things that stood out about it. One is we were surprised at how happy these people were. It really taught me the meaning of ignorance is bliss, that they didn't want to come to the United States, they didn't know anything about it. I was the only blue-eyed, blonde-haired person they'd ever seen, so that was, I had more chicks after me on that trip than before or since. And then, of all things, about probably 10 years later, there was flood, came through and just wiped out the whole area where we had worked, which was, just devastating. You could, picture those kids growing up. So.
We didn't have, we had 6 African Americans in our class, which wasn't a ton in a class of a couple hundred. But for me, and I know for a lot of my classmates, it's the first time we ever had interaction with them, and it was the perfect environment where none of that stuff mattered. So you were all sort of on equal footing. And then you go on the sports fields or courts, and then talent is really what matters there. And if somebody's good, then they play, and you back each other up, you pull for each other, and that's really, it's pretty hard to have a great team outcome without the concept of inclusion. And heck, anybody who was good, we welcomed, and it was all encouraged. The coaches provided that. There was no tolerance of cliques or nonsense, and we pulled together pretty quickly and pretty strongly. And I think it was a great foundation for the rest of our lives. At least I'll speak for me in saying that.
I think over time, and I guess to the fact that 40-something years later, I still feel very close to a lot of the guys that I went to school with. It took me a while to feel comfortable, to feel safe. But I do think that something about this environment gave you the opportunity to create really strong and enduring relationships that is a testament to something, and whether it's the Jesuit way, whether it's the testament to these guys and so forth, I can't say, but it was not the easiest time of my life, but in retrospect, it's probably one of the best times of my life.
It took a lot of courage for any of us to try to come here because more kids applied than they took, and we knew that. But I guess perhaps the second part of my freshman year, I started to look at things differently as it pertained to my black student friends and athletes that I played with, in that I thought to myself, would I have the courage to apply to a school that I didn't know whether I'd get in or not, and then of the 220 plus kids, let's say 214 of them were black, and I was one of 6 white kids. How much extra courage would that have taken for me? I'm not sure I could have done that. And I applaud these guys for having that double set of courage.
I mean, I dedicated this season to my brother, and I always felt that he was with me even though he was gone. But these guys here, you know, and even Raj, and even Wayne, and everybody, I felt like they all helped me out. We're all friends, and I just told Cal this morning, I remember the page. I remember the page number, page 258. Look at the page number. He said it all. He said, and if you look at it, he goes, we're trying to figure out a reason how could this group of guys, how did we win the state? I mean, I know we didn't demolish people. Like Joe said, it was like 4.5 points. Each game was decided by less than 4.5 points or something like that. But we were friends, and I think we all got along. Goofy sometimes as we were with each other. I loved all that, and I needed all that. I mean, I really needed that. And these guys, without, you know, ever having to acknowledge the fact, I mean, that's a tough thing to talk to somebody about, especially as 17-year-old kids, I guess. But death like that, we all understood. I understood, you know. To this day, it's you look at any kind of loss like that, it's such a personal, horrific thing. And to this day, it stays with me, and I'll never forget my brother, but I'll never forget these guys either. They supported me, and I think helped me personally, especially when you have a guy. Well, that's another thing Kellett said in that part, like, you know, we pulled for each other. You didn't want to let the other guy down. Well, hell, I played in front of Tom Shackey. There's no way you're going to let that guy. It was like 110% all the time. And he was right behind me. So, yeah, and we played for each other. And I just think that kind of was, kind of not only helped us to win the state championship, but helped me personally.
Mike mentioned friendship. I'd use a different word. As a family. So,
yeah. Well, I was actually pretty close to Ed. Him and I got along pretty well for not all the best reasons, best activities, but we did. And, you know, Ed was small stature and I was a little bit larger. But it's a kind of thing that you come to realize, and I don't know if we realized it at the time, but it's the soul of the guy that gets in you. And, you know, even though they're gone physically, their soul is inside of you, and if you can just remember that, at least that's helping me with other losses in my life. If you can just remember that, which is hard to do, and I know it is, that you can get through it by thinking of, well, they're still inside of you. They're still there.
I think something I thought Joe brought up or explained really well in the book on this topic is, you know, when you're a senior in high school or a junior in high school, whatever, you think you're eternal. I mean, you just don't think anything can happen to you. And between Mike's brother, between Bob, Ed, the Vietnam War, which by the time we came along, it was pretty obvious that they were going to get rid of the college deferment. So I think that had a real bearing on us, especially our last couple of years. And I think it probably did make us closer. And I think, as Bill and other people have said, you just didn't want to let these guys down. And I think, you know, because you see us, that here we are 45, 8, whatever years later, and these are still the people I least want to let down.
And on the evening that Ed died, a player that's not here that was a big part of the team named Kevin O'Toole played on the same side as Tom and Mike and I. His parents offered to have a get-together for all of us. And, you know, at that point, at being 17 years old, you've gone to perhaps some wakes for your grandparents or something, or aunts or uncles. And it wasn't an official wake, but it was as close as I ever got to a wake where I was so heavily impacted. And I think that ties into some of the things that Bill said. I think that really began the concept of family with us, that we became so close together. And it wasn't limited to football players. The entire class was up there in one way, shape, or form.
I have to say one thing about it. We're 17-year-old kids, and of course our heart was with Mike Weesey, what he went through, and you could see it. We knew of Bob. He was a few years older than us and sort of a heroic figure, but I didn't really know him. I don't know that I ever met him. Ed was among us. It was just almost incomprehensible. And others go through loss, and reflecting on it all these many years, one of the things that I just has a profound impact on me is the way we reacted. It was a violent, senseless, just random act of violence that was just so horrible. And I just don't remember 1 minute thinking about revenge or anything other than being together and healing. And I think that came from many places, our own home background, but two specifically. One was from Ed. It just wasn't something Ed, he lived for a week or so after he was shot. And he didn't, a couple of us snuck up to see him. He didn't talk about it. He didn't say anything about that. Wasn't accusing anybody. And the other was this community here. What we were learning here and experiencing here, that this is it's surrounded by this goodness that the Jesuits were promulgating here.
I'll tell you a Dunn story. I love Debbie Dunn. When I was second semester of my junior year, I had 39 demerits, 40 were suspended. And back then we were big into having student disciplinary boards. So I was called in that summer to the student disciplinary board, and when I walked in, it was all faculty. So I said, oh, so this is the student disciplinary board. And that didn't go over well. So Father Bailey, who was mentioned earlier, wrote this nice letter to my parents about how I needed to get my act together and I was heading down the wrong direction. And everybody was telling me, a lot of people were saying you need to, get your act together and whatnot. And it took Debbie Dunn to see me and say, babe, I understand that you got a problem. If you get any more demerits, you're not playing football. And that ended it. It was over. I had that much respect for him, and that was the end of it. I was done.
They asked us all to be on that board.
No way.
I knew the most about it. I wasn't.
Yeah, your experience.
And Paul Martell. The football team could have been 500. It could have been sub 500. It was, it was a close. We had one exceptional player, and we had a lot of very good players, and there were no holes in it. But we also had Martell, who, while he was not everybody's cup of tea, he shouldn't be. He was the head coach. He was the leader. And you were fully confident in his ability, and you knew that he was better than the guy on the other sidelines. So you knew you had that going for him. So just two guys, and now you look at a football game and there's lots of guys on the sideline.
Yeah, kind of dovetail that on Martell. I mean, I remember when you mentioned the book with the Columbia Hickman game, I think it was. The unbalanced line and the huddles we had. And I remember going up to the line, and we'd have two guys over here, and the other guys in the team were like, what the hell? It was like confusing as heck. I mean, it was, I'm not going to say he was a genius, but he was pretty adept at his coaching, what he knew. And he just, like Tim said, I certainly listened to him, and I think we all did. We just kind of admired him for that.
I have to say, everybody had their own view of Coach Martell, but I love Paul Martell and trusted him from the beginning. And I have one little anecdote which sticks in my mind even to this day. My brother Jim, what's unmentioned is that we were all part of a team in 1969 that was one of the best teams around. It really was. And my brother Jim was the all-district quarterback that year. But I'm going to flash back, and I can never remember if I was 8th grade or freshman year. I was watching Coach teach my brother footwork of being a quarterback. And he comes out there with his untied waffly shoes, whatever that bottom was on those shoes he wore. And he was like a ballerina, step by step, precision. And Tim was talking about preparation. Well, that was all part of it with Coach. And to this day, and I've seen all the great ones, whether it was Oklahoma, Texas, my brother Jim still ran the option better than any of them I ever saw, or at least equal to the best that I've ever seen. And that was Coach.
They made a terrific combination. Paul was very cerebral, and these guys put it very well. We knew we were never going to get out coached. Eddie Dunn was our spirit. He was our conscience. You played for Evie in a way that you didn't play for Paul. You were confident in Paul, but Eddie motivated us. The way it was separated, Paul had the skill folks, and Evie was the line coach. So I saw more of Evie than I did of Coach Martell. A quick story on Evie Dunn, as Joe talked about the CBC game in his book, it was a terrific game to win for obvious reasons. So we're on the team bus, and as you can imagine, we are celebrating beyond compare. The bus is literally rocking. None of us really noticed that very close to our team bus was a CBC team bus. Eddie let us celebrate for perhaps a minute. Then he got on the bus and he said to us, "Babe, or babes, as great a game as this was to win, it was just as tough to lose. Let's hold it down till we get back to school." That's kind of a window into that man.
These guys have heard what I said about Paul Martell. He was the best coach I ever had. I played a lot of sports, and all the different descriptive words that Joe used in the book were so right on. So I'd like to tell a little story about what I learned from him. First of all, he commanded a lot of respect, and he was a disciplinarian, as Joe found out. But it was all the little things he did. I've coached a lot too, my boys and stuff, and I used his method of coaching. And you do it this way, or you don't do it. You do it right, or you don't do it. You follow the rules. We were real big on rules. Mike Arante and myself, who coached this SLUH baseball team, and one was we had a sponsor, and the sponsor's putting in a lot of money, and you wear a uniform that represents that sponsor. So when you wear the uniform, you wear it right. And the one thing was you always had your hat on the right way, not backwards. And quite a few years later, I was in an IHOP, and Chris, one of our pitchers, was in one of the back booths. And he was sitting there, I hadn't seen him in 8 years, 9 years. His hat was on backwards. And he didn't notice me, but when he got up to walk out, he saw me. And the thing he did was took his hat and put it on the right way. Okay, so that sort of gives you an idea of Paul Martell. When I think back on it, yes, it was amazing. But during the game, I had no idea they were there. That's when I played. I didn't hear the band, I didn't hear the cheering, I didn't hear anything. But when you look back on it, to be able to play in front of 18,000 people, that's amazing.
Well, I did look up in the stands because I said this is the only time that's ever going to happen in my life, and I want to remember this, and I drew it all in, and of course you live every day with your football teammates, but you look up and you see all your classmates and your family, and Ed Hawk's family was there. And Kerry Pruitt, the student council president and star defensive tackle for CBC, did a most remarkable thing from that school. They gave a plaque honoring Ed at halftime. And Wayne Hereford was there escorting my girlfriend, whom I couldn't escort because I was all sweaty in my football uniform at halftime. And Tim Rogers was there, and the cheerleaders were there. And Bob Tebow was there on the sidelines on crutches because he had gotten his knee crushed the week before. And you just think, man, and as I reflected and putting the story together, just the serendipity of all this, it's just, in that grand arena, it was special. And we thought, well, let's do the best we can. But hey, we were lucky to win that game. But it was a really, really special, memorable evening, and it stayed with me obviously for all these years. I can still kind of smell the smells and feel the crispness of the air and hear the sounds and yeah, when the whistle started and you're trying to survive with the guys across the line that are trying to knock you on your rear end, it takes on a different dimension. But it was great pageantry and something very special for a bunch of 17, 16, 15-year-old kids.
As I was just telling Joe, I think before we started, I thought we couldn't have three better captains on our team. I mean, you had Tebow, who's kind of charismatic, I would say is a good way to, intelligence in Joe, and the athleticism of Bill Ziegler. We could have had Czech as possibly a captain, but he's too intense. We would have all been grounded.
I think as years go by, we become perhaps more modest on what we accomplished. Modesty is an attribute, character. But I think when you look back and you look at a team that didn't have a home field, that had to share practice facilities with its freshman and sophomore teams every day on the lower field, and what we accomplished was truly fantastic. And there is, again, a lot of modesty. We had a lot of players that got postseason honors. We were not a team that had only one talented ball player. We had one extremely talented ball player in Bill. But we had a lot of football talent on that team on both sides of the ball. And yeah, there were some close games. But guess what? We got everybody's best game. Everybody's best game.
I don't know if you guys know this, but after every game, a lot of us would come back and go into what we called the North Hall at that point, and pray. And what was always amazing was the feeling and the spirit after you guys have been out on the field doing what you were doing, and those of us who weren't, but were in the stands, hoping for you and cheering for you. And I remember, because I led the prayer a lot of times, that it really made you feel like you were part of something, celebrating, what clearly you guys were working a lot harder on than we were. But it's one of the memories I have of the year is after every game coming back here and going into the chapel and thanking God actually for the success we were experiencing.
My first career out of school was as a sports writer, and then I left to go into business, and I was so busy in my business career I was able to have this fantasy that someday I could write a book, which I knew I never would be able to do because I would never have enough time. But as I was doing that, I saw these stories of high school sports, of Friday Night Lights, Hoosiers, Remember the Titans, and I thought, well, those are really compelling stories, but they're pretty local, and I think our story is compelling all that we had gone through and how we pulled together and the serendipity of us winning the championship. And I thought, well, when I had some time after my business career ended, I said, well, let me pursue this. And so I started to outline it, and I said, well, here are the people that I want to talk to. And the first person I reconnected with was Mike Wiese. And I said, well, Mike is vital. First of all, he was one of our 2 All-State players, and he was a defensive end. You might think of it now as you see him, he's kind of bulked up a little bit, but then he weighed about 170 pounds, and he was skinny and bony and mild-mannered, and so Mike agreed to visit with me, and we had a cup of coffee, and we're talking about it, and he's talking about his brother Bob, and we're both in tears at the end of it. I thought, well, maybe there's something here. And so any writer would probably tell you this. I threw it in the garbage can probably 25 times along the way. I thought, who's going to want to read this? And it was hard. But just doing the interviews and tracking the things down and then just living back in the 60s, the times, and researching all that stuff, I thought, well, I think this is probably worth telling. And in the end, I did it kind of as a salute to these guys, to the classmates, the Jesuits, the school. There are a lot of themes in it. It's as much as anything, the story is a guy who's maybe in the 4th quarter of his life looking back saying, did I do anything worthwhile? And the message, I guess, to others, it's maybe a little pretentious, is, hey, don't be so hard on yourself. Just be a better person, a man for others, a better father, friend, whatever. And this accomplishment just kept coming up. We were lucky to have won the title. Heck, Steve Walsh is sitting back here. Steve was our star basketball player and baseball player, and I say in the book, both of those teams were much better candidates to win a state championship. So there's such a level of good fortune that comes in, the bounce of the ball and so forth. And then doing the rest of the interviews with most of these guys, I thought, well, let me put it out there, so it was really gratifying. And the best measure is that these guys all showed up here. I guess if they didn't like it, they would have been avoiding me. So that's pretty gratifying, and it's really a tribute to the school, all the other classes. It's really hard to win a state championship. We won the only one, and there have been many, many good qualified teams. And so I don't want people that aren't a member of the team to think, well, hey, this is about the wonderfulness of us. That's not really the message. That's not what the book's about. I think there's plenty in it for a lot of people. As much as anything, it's the bonds that you can form at a school like this that's available to you if you give others a chance, if you listen, if you're a better classmate, a better teammate, a better student. The rewards at this point in your life to look back and say, hey, okay, I think that's going to be okay.
When you see the word wafting on the first page, and you see one of my favorite lines in the whole book is on page 3. Joe went swimming with, I guess, Dell and whoever, and they said, we enjoyed the smell of chlorine and cooked meat. It gives it quality, and Joe's got a great sense of humor, and there's a lot of deprecating humor in there, and it's someone who reads a lot. I thoroughly enjoyed reading, and I learned a lot, which is amazing. You think you know everything sometimes, and it was terrific.
When Joe first said he was going to write the book, I went thinking of Tim Rogers, whose band played at my wedding many, many, many years ago. Then after not playing in a band for a long time, Tim and the group got back together and they were going to play somewhere. We were all heading down to listen to the new group, and somebody said, what if they suck? And we all and there was that moment of, oh my God.
I'm just glad the word was one.
And they were terrific. And one of the first reactions is, okay, Joe's going to write a book. Joe's a very intelligent guy. What if it doesn't? But you read the book, Joe can turn a phrase.
Yes.
Well written. I know the passion he brought to it. I know the time and effort he put into it. I don't know how you could write it any better. It's terrific. Family members that I've given it to, friends, kind of initially thought, oh yeah, that's nice. Read it and were just enthused about it. So it's terrific.
I had my doubts about what was going to be in the book because, me being an athlete for most of my life and still involved in it presently, I go, how can you write a book about a football season? You know, and all the other different things that he talks about that the kids at the school are going through. Really, it enlightened me. It really did. And you know, I am sorry, I'm so emotional. But my wife was the first to read the book. I had 2 older sons that went here, were the next ones to read the book.
I agree with Bill. I think giving it to my kids and having them read it, I mean, obviously they weren't around. And wow, all this really, you know, you mention things over the years, you know, but it just goes, you know, they're like we were when we were 17, you know, we would listen to. And so I gave them the books and they read it, and my daughter gave it to her husband, and then her husband gave it to his dad, who went here he was here 2 years behind us, and it's Tim O'Neill, and he really enjoyed it. And, Joe paid me $20 to read it. He was on $40 for showing up. He only gave me 15.
Yeah.
I think of all the academic experience I've had, I look back on this as foundational in terms of how to learn, in terms of creating a sort of a moral and an ethical view of the world. I don't go to any other reunions of any other places I've gone to school, and I've been to all but one here. My brother went to school here, my 3 cousins went to school here. So for me personally, it's one of the most important, not only academic experiences I had, even though there were times where I actually made it through never getting jugged because I broke this. Never.
Wow.
Never.
When they're gonna beat you up in the alley after this.
But you know, just looking back at it, it's
Carpool with college.
right. Well, you know, we almost did, because the first year, remember how we had the parade for homecoming?
Yeah.
And we got somewhere at 107, and we threw eggs at a CBC. And Father Hagen saw us and took our cards, and I was terrified, because you know, it's 2 months into being in school.
Yeah.
And I had a terrible memory, so I was scared of memorizing articles. But on Monday, he just put us through a routine and let us off. And from then on, it never happened. But anyway, I look back at it just as an incredibly foundational part of my life, and something that, you know, I've always treasured.
You know how everybody says the Ohio State? Yeah, this is the St. Louis High.
Yeah.
I follow up what Wayne said. I can't say it any better. It was a foundational, the school was a foundational experience in so many different, academically, morally, religiously, all of the, socially, all of the above. When you have an experience with any endeavor in life where people work together toward a common goal, and you're successful in that with people that you really love, that affects you for the rest of your life. And obviously, you know, we're almost 50 years out. I see these guys frequently. We still come down here and talk about life and man reason and things of that nature. So it's.
But when you came in here, you knew that people were coming from Illinois. They were coming from, you know, North St. Louis, South St. Louis, from all over. And a lot of us had competed against each other as 8th graders at all these different Catholic schools. And a lot of us didn't like each other at the time. Yeah. And we, you know, because we competed against each other, and there was quite a rivalry between quite a few of us. And then when we came together, we realized, you know, what it really meant. So to me, I think that was really, really important.
Foundations is what they've said, and I would add friendships for life. a bond that you could be separate. I went to school out in Denver. I'd see these guys during the summer and then maybe holidays. You just took up right where you left off.
It was all of our whole class. There was 200 of us, plus the faculty. And it was very inclusive, very, we cared about each other in a way that has been hard to replicate in any other environments. And so that's pretty special, especially that time in our life, and that's why I think of our teammates that we lost, Danny Kalachi and then Pat Bannister. And Pat I knew before any of these guys from the time we were 5 years old, and it kind of gets inside you and it becomes part of the fabric of your life. And so I thank the school and the people that have run it for now 200 years for giving me this opportunity. I thank my parents for sacrificing to pay the tuition for me to go here. And so that's I guess how I would answer that. The specialness of it, I'll always feel.
Well, we've been doing it for what, 7 years, I guess?
Yeah.
And there's maybe 15, 18 guys out of the class that are, in and out that come. And it's, I think it's kind of a reaffirmation of our time here. We're still looking for answers, but still willing to share with each other. I always felt like our class was kind of special in that we really got along well together. And whether you were an athlete or a guy in a play or a guy in a band, it really didn't matter. I think we all enjoyed being around each other and learned from each other. And I think that's going on now in our Man Reason meetings. We still, make fun of each other, and we still ask important questions and look for, even though we're not going to find many answers, we still look for them, which I think is what the Jesuits taught us to do.
I think the other word I think of all the time when I describe why I'm part of this group, not the Man Reason group, is trust. That I trust these guys more than anybody in my life, and I think that's such a big part of it because, as Steve said, everybody's got different opinions on anything, but I always learn something. It's something that even though I've missed the last 2 meetings, it's the thing I try the most to schedule around so I don't miss it, because everybody shares, the good and the bad. It's another part. It was mentioned. I think Tom mentioned the self-deprecating nature of the book. I think that's also why, for people, and why as a class we got along so well. These guys are as humble as it gets, and they're, I've certainly never had any chance to play myself, but I never felt like I was excluded. I always felt like I was part of the group, and that's a tribute to these guys. I don't think you see that all the time, and I think that's what still comes through in the Man Reason group. I've said it a little earlier, and I said it to these guys, that I am more prepared walking into these halls for the Man Reason meetings than I ever was in the 4 years that I went here, because I don't want to let them down.